Hey everyone, it's Mattea with the Sierra Club Grand Canyon chapter, aka the Arizona chapter. I am our Grand Canyon program manager, and I'm based out of the unceded homelands of over 13 tribal nations in Flagstaff, Arizona. And I'm so excited to welcome you to Land Defenders, a podcast dedicated to the voices, stories, and wisdom rooted in the lands of the greater Grand Canyon region. Here, on land sacred to many indigenous peoples, each stone, river, mountain, and canyon wall holds stories of connection, reverence, and defense. In each episode, we challenge the forces threatening this living ecosystem and elevate the stories of those defending its future. From activists and elders to water protectors and land defenders, we're here to share the truth, confront injustice, and explore the deep-rooted connections that tie culture to conservation. Join us as we move beyond the rim and into the heart of the work to protect this region. Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Laura Jo West, former Coconino Forest Supervisor, aka the Forest Supervisor who manages the peaks and subsequently Snowbowl. Don't forget to listen to part 1 if you haven't already. All right, off to Laura Jo. How did the Forest Service and you respond to their attack on you, essentially?
First of all, try not to take it too personally. Although, like I said earlier, these relationships are personal, so it was hard not to. But I also felt strongly we were not only doing the right thing, but we were making progress. And after so many years of not. And my staff was working so hard. I felt, it was painful. They were devastated too. A couple of them in particular. It was really hard. I'll tell you, this is a little tangential, but for me personally, what I did, because like you said, all of this went on behind closed doors. I wasn't even privy to it. I was curious, like, what are these allegations and why can't I know what they are? If they're resulting in this big of a change, they must be big. I must have really screwed up somewhere. And I was open to it. I love learning about, I love feedback and learning and what can I do to improve. Always wanted to know that. And the only reason I conclude was that this was this was getting to be a real pain in the butt for the Forest Service as an agency. And I don't think there were, honestly, it wasn't a big deal in terms of, she's doing things terribly, or this is not going well, or is this going to damage us, or anything like that. I think it was just, let's just make this go away. Let's just make this go away. And in fact, in conversations I had with some people tangentially involved, that was sort of the energy that was behind this is, what can you do to just make this stop? Coming to the chief and talking about this and then all the drama around that. So my bosses decided that removing me from Snowbowl interactions was the way to make it stop. So I don't think there's anything more complex than that, honestly. And that was their reaction, I think, was just to make the ick go away, which is really disappointing. If there were a really big reason, like if it wasn't serving the needs of the agency or we weren't meeting the mission of the agency or things like that, my goodness, I had been a forest supervisor for many, 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 many years at that point on 2 different forests. And oftentimes, we make sacrifices and we don't align with our own values all the time because you do things, make decisions that are for a different goal, for a goal of the agency to progress in certain ways. And they might not be exactly what you would do, but you do that. You make those sacrifices. That's what you do. But I think, as I mentioned in an article that was written on me once, it's like being pecked to death by ducks. Over time, those little things, they just kind of accumulate. Mm-hmm. And I get to this point now where that alignment with my values and with integrity and that kind of thing mattered so much more. I mean, it's just like, we're done, And when I found that the agency had capitulated because there were complaints, unfounded complaints being made, and for no other reason. There was no grander scheme that we were trying to reach. That was really disappointing. That was really, really disappointing. And that's what really put me, it's like, do I want to work here anymore? Mm-hmm. And again, sometimes those decisions are made, you're moved off of things because there's a greater good out there that we need to try to achieve and work together on. And this is your role in that, is to move on and to do something else. I get that. I'm all about that. But that's not what this was. This was just, it was uncomfortable. It was something that was uncomfortable for the agency. And to me, that's not good enough to give up those kinds of relationships. Mm-hmm. It was pretty sad.
Yeah. It's wild how much influence that and power the industry had over their decision, that it led them to go that far. And it's scary when we're seeing these corporate powers taking precedence over who is in these positions, taking precedence over the health of the land, taking precedence over relationships to a space that have been there since time immemorial. Even like hearing that phrase of we won, they lost is so disgusting is the word that comes to mind. How do you have the audacity to say that so comfortably?
Yeah.
In a space where, well, leave it at that.
And there were, I won't go into them, but there were a lot of examples of that would just take your breath away about that attitude.
Oh, I'm sure.
I can't even begin to describe. Yeah, which is why I chose to call it out when I left. It's just, we can't. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves.
Yeah.
Frankly.
It seems like this through line is there's a fear of change, a fear of doing things differently within the Forest Service, a annoyance with being open to dreaming bigger. How are you seeing that? And what do you feel like the Forest Service needs to work on going forward? You're
really going to get me started on this, aren't you? Boy,
that's the goal.
I have a list for you. There's a lot the Forest Service can do. And again, the entire agency isn't like this. Each region of the Forest Service, and there are 9 regions currently. I think there's about to become only 3. I think they're going to consolidate, but that's a different topic.
Next podcast.
The 9 regions all have their own personality. It's different groups of people, different communities, different economies, different needs and wants and experiences. And so they all have their own personalities and their own cultures of how they work. Now, I was in Arizona before I went to the Pacific Northwest. And so I had a taste of what the Southwest region's culture was. So I wasn't unfamiliar with it when I got here in 2015. But for instance, when I was in the Pacific Northwest, my experience there was an incredibly innovative region, always wanting to try new things, really putting it out there, like what's the right thing to do to achieve the mission? What's the next right thing? And then what are the processes we can put in place to support that? It all got flipped around in my experience. And again, I'm just speaking from me. In my experience in Region 3, it's what are our processes and how will they constrain what we do or don't do? So it started not with the possibilities, but with processes. And with it's a very, very, in my experience, a conservative region, very averse to taking much risk, wants to stay under the radar in terms of Forest Service overall, and Department of Agriculture wants to kind of like lay low, has been my experience. And again, this was 4 years as a ranger in Prescott and 7 years as a forest supervisor in Flagstaff. So that's my experience. What can the Forest Service do? And again, I'm targeting this really at Region 3. This is the Southwest region where, again, this culture seems to be pretty staid and pretty entrenched in my experience. So I think that developing a possibilities mindset, again, thinking not in terms of constraint. And I think this is where not what is the laws and what we can do, but what is it we want to do, and then what can we do to build support for that. Building a culture of inclusion and being willing to share leadership over a space. Again, this is done in other parts of the country where the tribes enter into agreements with the Forest Service about how they'll co-lead over certain areas. Bears Ears is one example of that with the Forest Service, BLM, Park Service, tribes. Now that's congressionally legislated. That's a little bit different, but they still are going through that same process of coming together to determine how they'll manage a piece of land. So it's not unheard of, but I think being willing to be more inclusive in how we make decisions. Also a willingness to try new approaches, like when you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Trust your people, right? Trust your leaders, trust your staff. Trust that if you have the right intent, a strong process, people being willing to work with you, that you'll get to a good outcome. And know that it might take a while and the road may be bumpy, but that your leaders need your support, and you're not going to grow anything new. You're not going to meet the needs of the future without having that approach. The other thing that I've found that the agency, and this is not uncommon among bureaucracy or anything other than Indigenous communities, is a language barrier. And I don't mean language as in like the Navajo language, but I mean language in the way we talk about place. And this idea, you could see the bristles come up on people's minds when you bring up the word spiritual or sacred. It's just not a language we're used to. And in fact, even in all the laws that were put in place to supposedly acknowledge the values and the cultural systems of Indigenous peoples, we use terms like religion and things like that, which are not the same in cultures other than Indigenous cultures. And so it has warped the whole interpretation when you get to the courts of how that is applied on the ground. So there's got to be some, not just from a legal standpoint, but just how we talk to each other. Like, I know Snowbowl and even others, sometimes in the Forest Service too, they look at this sacred idea and it's like, what? What does that even mean? And it's like, you don't necessarily have to understand in order to honor something. It may not make sense to you. That's okay. It doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean it's not important to acknowledge and to embrace and to figure out how to work that into your management system. So another thing that I think the Forest Service can do, especially in this region, is to learn from others. I didn't know necessarily where this was going to go. And my staff was doing this too. We were looking out at other places in the country where this is working. In my last couple weeks in my job, I was talking to the superintendent at Grand Canyon to talk about what he was doing. He was doing magnificent things under Secretary Deb Haaland, and the Department of Interior to bring tribes together in a co-management type situation. Not just at Grand Canyon, but they were doing that across the board in a lot of different places. So I was trying to learn from him and model what they're doing. So I think a lot of that exploring and curiosity and not reinventing the wheel. We didn't have to do that. There are certain uniquenesses here for sure, but we didn't have to start from scratch. We could learn from others. Another thing is to recognize, the Forest Service needs to recognize this is a long-term commitment. You got to be all in, and what that means is you have to commit to finding leaders when certain leaders leave who will carry on, because one of the most difficult things for not just Indigenous communities but everybody in the communities is when the leaders leave, and even if they didn't like them, they knew what to expect, and so that not having that continuity in philosophy and what's important is really detrimental to these relationships. So that has to be a commitment by the region to make sure that what is happening in a certain place where relationships are being developed, that is a priority in moving on with new leaders. Another recognition I think that needs to happen with the Forest Service is we tend, because our processes are so outlined in law and regulation, we tend to think of interest groups, or at least behave toward them as, tribes as interest groups. We behave towards them as though they were like any interest group, like a conservation group, like the Sierra Club, or like this or like that. And they're not. They're not someone, not that those groups aren't incredibly valuable and their viewpoints are valuable, but this is a different kind of relationship. It's even codified as a nation-to-nation relationship with the Forest Service. It's a different stature and should be cherished that way and treated differently, not just have projects laid down in front of people and then check the box. Yes, we consulted with the tribes because we told them what we wanted to do. But building those things from the start, working with tribes in a different way and not just asking them to respond to things that we think are the right thing to do. And always be transparent and honest, always, always, always. And I got a lot of pushback. In fact, one of the allegations against me was that I had shared, I honestly can't remember what it was, but I had shared something with the tribes when I was meeting with them that someone thought was inappropriate. And it was totally appropriate in my mind. It was just how this process was working. And anyway, if you're trying to build trust, you don't start cheating on transparency, right? You want to maintain that. So again, in making sure the leaders that follow, over time, maintain that perspective and that adherence to transparency and honesty is really important. So I think those are all really important things. And I think that the agency would be really well served to do that, not just right for the Indigenous communities, but for the viability of the agency itself. This is a good way to go. This is the right thing. It's not. We can check all the boxes, but it's insufficient to do everything right if we're not doing the right thing. And I think that's the bottom line, and that's the bottom line I took with me when I walked out the door for the last time. So I think one of the things that informed my decision to leave was this notion that I think a lot of times this sort of parochial way of operating as a bureaucracy is that it's important. There's a notion that as a leader you're supposed to support the bureaucracy. That a lot of your decisions need to feed that, which is fine if you're also serving the mission and what the job is to do. But it became increasingly, for me, first of all, as far as the law goes, I got to follow the law. I don't mean to suggest by earlier comments I may have made that we decide the right thing to do, then so we just make it up as we go along. We need to follow the law. We don't need to use that as our starting point. We use that as our checkpoint. So we decide what's the right thing to do, what's our mission, what's inclusive, what's important, and then what laws apply to that. And that's how I looked at that. But there is a lot of feeding the bureaucracy too, for the bureaucracy, and I say that almost pejoratively, and I don't necessarily mean to, but the Forest Service, like any institution, is an institution that is trying to survive. And so a lot of that involves leaders who are willing to spend their time making sure that they're doing what helps the agency survive. And I think it's really easy sometimes to lose focus on doing that instead of doing what I know I hired on to do, and that was to serve communities and the people and to take care of the land in a way that does that. That's always been my focus. And I think I've probably been a little bit of a renegade as a leader, is because I would do that at the expense of feeding the machine, and I would try to remember and do that because I knew it was important and I knew it mattered. But over time, that what was required to keep the agency happy and functioning was diverging from what I believed the mission that we were chartered to do was. And I think this was a case of that, where I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
It's like you almost have to veer away from the focus being on serving the land and communities to staying out of court. Or
so there is and again, this goes when I say that the southwestern region is conservative. It's not just in this region, but a lot of orientation of leaders in the agency is, what do we have to do to stay out of court? Yeah, and so that doesn't lead to a lot of courageous action, right? You're going to try to play it safe. You're going to try to appease. You're going to try to stay below the radar. And I understand that. It's costly to go to court. And when you're paying those costs, you're not paying that money toward, restoring a spring or, improving rangelands or anything like that. So, you have to be very careful. It's not a bad goal to stay out of court. But it's a calculation, is it worth taking this risk, making this move, making this decision? Is the potential good outcome of this worth the possibility of going to court? And, Snowbowl has threatened to sue us numerous times while I was there. For what? I'm not quite sure. But I always thought that was really interesting because I wasn't quite sure what that would be. Because I know my role and everything that I was doing and my staff was doing that we had done prior was really consistent with current laws and regulations. But there is discretion space, of where I can operate within that. And I was using that to the fullest, for sure.
Yeah. So going forward, you offer an incredibly unique perspective of, I just want to know from you, for folks that are looking to protect these sacred peaks from environmentally and culturally genocidal corporation, what avenues do you see us being able to engage with that may further support our cause?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. This is going to come as a surprise probably to some of the listeners, but I wouldn't focus so much on Snowbowl. Snowbowl certainly has its, they operate as any business would, right? Maximize profits, provide an experience, all of that. And so they're the ones who the daily operations. Now, if your ski ticket, the price of your lift ticket, goes to $400, call Snowbowl, not the Forest Service. We don't have anything to do with that. The Forest Service has nothing to do with that. So the daily operations are obviously all about Snowbowl. But in terms of the larger things that you're talking about, it's the Forest Service. Again, the Snowbowl, Arizona Snowbowl Mountain Capital Partners is a permit holder with the Forest Service. The Forest Service is the one accountable. And Snowbowl cannot proceed with development of its lands or what it does in any major way without the approval of the Forest Service. So that's really where people need to focus their energy. Now, a lot of the efforts going on right now to evaluate and monitor the wastewater and its effects on the ecosystems on those slopes and below, those are wonderful. Data is always good. And I would encourage that to continue. However, I also think people need to be realistic that you can provide all of that data and show detrimental impacts in a measurable way, and it still may not affect the outcome. The Forest Service is not obligated to, let me see if I can word this correctly. The Forest Service is not obligated to not adversely affect the environment. It can still approve. I mean, it did. It ignored the whole cultural environment. Well, I shouldn't say ignore. It did not. Anyway, it ignored the cultural environment in the 2005 decision. There's no guarantee it wouldn't also say, yes, we understand these effects exist, but we think the trade-offs are worth it, and continue with the ongoing decision. So people need to just keep that in mind as all this effort is being placed on the water quality. Again, very important. Collect the data, display it, show it to the Forest Service, let the public know all those things, because you don't know what will come out of that. And what I'm saying may be totally wrong. The Forest Service may very well say, wow, okay, that's data we didn't have before, and now that we have it, it does make a difference, and here's what we're going to do differently. That may happen.
If it goes outside permit bounds, if the data starts to show that it's extending beyond what Snowbowl claimed, would that?
So that's a term and condition of the permit. The permit requires Snowbowl to keep its water within its bounds. So they would have to do something differently to change that effect, for sure. I don't know what that looks like yet. The Forest Service, they'd have to work with the Forest Service on that. But that would be a term and condition of their permit that they would have to abide by. Other things that they would, like I said, all the Forest Service needs to be able to do is demonstrate that their decisions are informed, not that they're good. So this is why you see the decisions you see sometimes that people might not agree with. As long as they are informed, as long as they demonstrate they've considered impacts, they don't have to be good decisions or the right decision or popular decisions. They could be anything, frankly. The law only requires that they be a well-informed decision. The other things people can do is, I would encourage a real focus on climate change. And, this is a desert environment. It's unusual to have a ski area here. Obviously, there's not enough snow naturally to keep it going. Even the MCP will acknowledge that they would have to shut down if they didn't have snowmaking. But that needs to be considered, especially as we start looking at alternative ways of using wastewater in a climate change environment, in a ongoing drought situation. We're going to have to start asking ourselves whether that is the appropriate use of that water, if that's really what we want to do with it. So I think those are long-term conversations, but I think those need to be raised as the appropriate use of wastewater. Is that the right place to do it? Working with the city. The Forest Service approved the use of snowmaking and putting it on the slopes, but the city has a contract with Snowbowl to provide the water. That contract is coming up at a certain point, and I can't remember right now when it was. I think they had it extended to 20 years, so I think it's 2034, something like that, when it comes up for renewal. If people are concerned about this, they can work with their city council members and the mayor to see if what they want to do about renewing that contract. That's probably where the rubber meets the road. That's the shortest distance between the 2 points is working with that. The Forest Service is cumbersome, and they have a different role. The Forest Service is also proposing, I heard rumors that there's going to be a forest plan amendment to the land management plan that will address Snowbowl somehow. I do not know anything about that, but it would be a public process, and it would address these issues of indigenous values around the peaks in conjunction with Snowbowl in some way. Again, I would encourage people to ask the Forest Service about where that is in process and get involved in that and see what can be articulated clearly in the forest plan, which is a legal document, and to support whatever it is that folks want to see with regard to Snowbowl and the use of snowmaking. And that's pretty much it. Those are the avenues I would take, is just try to stay involved, recognize the different roles of the city, Snowbowl, and the Forest Service. Those are the three big entities, and they all have different roles. I really don't, I think the protests on Snowbowl are great, but Snowbowl's not going to change. They're doing okay, They have no real reason to make any changes. It's about appealing to the land management agency, the Forest Service, or the city. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your time and all of the work that you did when you were in that position. I, again, just want to reiterate that I really hope that they continue that work. it was even just sitting there in the moment and imagining what that collaborative process could be and that co-management could be is incredibly powerful. And it's exciting to see, we've been seeing it, especially over the past couple of years, become much more of a possibility in the land management world. And that's really exciting. And I'm excited to see that continue to happen. And now that we've kind of started to lay some groundwork, not that it's the same everywhere. Like obviously everywhere that's done is going to be a completely different process with completely different people and communities, et cetera. But I'm excited that it's even been put on the table for sure. And thank you for all of your thoughts and all of your reflections. And it's really interesting. Everyone that we've talked to, their different perspectives on how to get involved has been really cool. And I think they're all puzzle pieces to the much bigger puzzle that we're looking at. So thank you.
I'll just add a couple things here at the end. I just want to say that, every time I did not plan to leave the Forest Service under these terms or at this time, at the time that I did. And every time I think back on that, I do feel sad sometimes that, I didn't make the kind of difference I wanted to make in terms of getting the traction. I planned to really get this in motion before I moved on. But looking back, I'd like to think that calling out what I did, frankly, and working with my staff the way that we did over the years did make a difference and really cracked a door, I think. And maybe that was my role, is making sure that we stuck that foot in the door and hopefully that opening, people will run with it. There's so many things aligned to make sure that happens. Biden had some executive orders that really prompted a different relationship with tribes that were really powerful in my decision to move forward in this way, that I felt very supported by that. And I think over time, maybe not right now, that will carry on. And, and people, will know that this is not new and different. This is just the right thing to do. That's all I can say. It's just the right thing. Even it's going to be messy. It's going to be hard. Not every tribe's going to be able to or want to be involved, and that's okay too. We'll just have to. We can't let perfection get in the way of good.
Absolutely. And these movements take generations.
They do.
It's like all of these little steps are so important, and we're not going to see them come to fruition necessarily, but that doesn't mean that they're any less important. So I'm sure that door opening was a crucial piece of this, if not one of the main impetus of it going forward. So
and I credit my staff as well too. Jeannie Stevens, Bridget Beckett. There were several that worked really hard to make all of this happen. So Peter Pillis. So anyway, takes a village, right?
It does. It really does. That's for sure.
But I believe it. We have a lot of good folks in the Forest Service who are trying really hard to do the right thing under extraordinary circumstances, and I have a lot of faith.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Mattea. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us today in our conversation with Laura Jo West. To learn more and stay connected, follow us on social media at Protect Grand Canyon, listed in the show notes, and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And please consider sharing these episodes with others. We have had great success in sharing this podcast out into the world just by word of mouth, so please don't stop. And thank you to each one of you that has done that. Every episode and story shared is just another step towards protecting these sacred places for generations to come. For questions or to get involved locally, don't hesitate to email me at mattea.goetz@sierraclub.org, also listed in the show notes. And a big thank you and shout out again to our incredible partners at Beyond FLG. You can find them on all the platforms at Beyond FLG, and I really do want to emphasize a thank you to them. They've been really instrumental in supporting this podcast and are an incredible group of humans doing really good work in the Flagstaff community, and they have a whole family of podcasts, so be sure to check those out as well. Until next time, may you find a deeper connection to the land and the wild places around you.